So there is something very weird going on with mirrored tangle, and I think I more or less understand what the problem is, so I would like to explain this to all of the notation nerds that care about this, those two of you, about why mirrored tangle doesn't look exactly as one would think it looks. So tangle is this trick. It's a hybrid of Twisted Sonic and a Swift. So tangle starts with this motion, so mirrored would start with this motion, right? Let me use my pinky just to hold the mods. So it would start like this, and then the mirrored of Swift is inverse Swift reverse. So it would be this one. This doesn't seem right, because here the C rotation of the top pen is consistent. You can see how the top pen rotates on this plane always on the same direction, but on the mirrored it changes, so it goes from here to here. Why this is the case? Okay, this is the big problem with mirrored tangle. Well, in pen spinning, because of how our hands are built, planes of rotation are kind of ill-defined. So in elementary notation, we call the only two planes of rotation that we can define more or less consistently without trouble, B and C. So B is this plane of rotation, and C is this plane of rotation or this plane of rotation. And you can see why these planes are not very well defined by this. So let's say, for example, a pass normal. Pass normal, seen from here, looks clockwise. But if I do it like this, it looks counterclockwise. This is because I bent my fingers from here to here. And thus the apparent motion of the pen changes. In practice, this is not a big deal. This is not a big deal. Like the problem with the B rotation axis is not that big, but with Z rotation axis, it's pretty big. So basically the thing with the C rotation axis is that this rotation and this rotation, we have to use the same name for them. If you have read my elementary notation section of the book, for example, in example 5, spin, here I explained that we should not distinguish these two planes of rotations, because if we were to do that, then we would have very similar tricks that are called different. We would have to call these tricks different tricks. So for example, this spin and this spin would be different tricks when they aren't. And you can change from one to the other with no real trouble, right? The change from one to the other is trivial. This is one problem with C rotation, but in this case, with the mirrored, we have yet another problem with the C rotation. Let me explain this. So, first of all, mirrored is the change, so like the mirror image about this plane here, right? So for example, if we have this rotation here, then its mirrored is going to be the same. We just flip it along this plane and it's going to be the same. So if we have clockwise rotation in this plane, the mirrored is also going to be clockwise, seen from above. But in this plane, if we have a clockwise rotation here, it's not going to look clockwise on the mirrored. So for example, the mirrored of this is going to be this. Why is this the case? Well, because as you saw, I also had to flip the position of my fingers. So here it goes from clockwise with 1 on top to counterclockwise with 2 on top. But of course, the trick is the same. You can see that in the end, if I do this transformation of my fingers, then we get the previous result. That is that this rotation doesn't change with mirrored. Okay, this is more or less understood, right? So rotations on this plane do not change with mirror, rotations in this plane change with mirror, apparently, but that is because also our position of the fingers is changing. How does this relate to tangle? Well, Twisted Sonic has most of its C rotation on this plane. So you can see why that's the case, right? The pen is mostly rotating in this plane. You can argue that, of course, there's some rotation here, right? Like after a Twisted Sonic, if the pen were to continue rotating, it would continue rotating clockwise here. You see how it kind of wants to continue rotating clockwise along this plane, but in the end, the trick itself is rotating mostly on this plane. However, for Swift, it's not like that. For Swift, the plane of rotation for the top pen is the other one. You can see how the top pen is rotating here. It's rotating here. So how does this translate? Well, if we try to find the mirrored of tangle, we have first a trick in which the first part changes C rotation. Apparently, again, everything inside is consistent, but because of how it works, the mirrored version of Twisted Sonic is going to be counterclockwise here, and then when we do the mirrored version of Swift, it's going to be clockwise. So we are going to have one direction change, apparent direction change. How can we solve this? Well, in the same way that we can that we have to, so I have explained how these two planes of rotation, we have to unify them into the same name. Well, because of this same logic, we have different variations of the trick which we have to unify under the same name. So in the case of tangle, we have this variation, and we have this variation. Okay, so we have this one, and we have this one. You can see that the composition of both variations is basically the same, right? If you look at it from here, Twisted Sonic and Twisted Sonic Reverse both have the same B rotation, so both are rotating like this, and everything else is basically consistent. The only thing that's changing is the C rotation of the first Twisted Sonic. So yeah, basically this one has, as looked from the top, the rotation is clockwise, while the other is counterclockwise, and thus has like an apparent direction change. What happens? Well, I've made a graph here. This is the normal, like regular variation, and this is the other variation. We have to call these two variations the same trick, because otherwise we get inconsistencies, and this one does not have a C change, does not have an apparent direction change, but this one does. If we calculate the mirrored versions of these two variations, we get these two. So the first one would be the one that I introduced before, so this, and this one would be this and this. And you can see that we go from no apparent direction change to an apparent direction change, and we go from apparent direction change to no apparent direction change. For the same logic, these two variations we have to call the same, so these two are mirrored tangle, and we can just say that the one without the direction change is the standard one. And okay, problem solved. Yeah, problem solved, but of course this is very unsatisfactory, right? You can see how for the normal tangle, when we do this Twisted Sonic, the pen is moving in this direction. So the pens are almost perpendicular. However, on the good mirrored tangle, the pens are moving here. So you can see that they are not spacious, right? It's almost parallel. So it's very unsatisfactory. You can see that the mirrored of one trick went from this position to this position, which is not what the mirrored modifier should do, right? The mirror modifier just flips things here, but it should not change like the relative positions of the pens. So yeah, this is the problem with mirrored tangle, and this is kind of the solution.